This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to tell you that Michelob Ultra is giving you the chance to win tickets to the NBA Finals. That's right, the 2025 NBA Finals. Just head to MichelobUltra.com/NBA Finals. Michelob Ultra courtside NBA Finals sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents, excluding Maryland residents. 21 up. Begins at 9 a.m. EST on February 16, 2025. Ends on May 5th, 2025. See official rules at MichelobUltra.com/rules for price and details. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Hello, this is your host, Ross Kenyon. I'm doing something that I've not done before. I feel like I did it a long time ago, but it's been a while. But in trying to make this show financially sustainable, I was able to pick up a couple of sponsors. It would do me a great favor if you could please listen and learn more about each of them, since they offer something to different parts of our audience that I think you will care about. These two sponsors, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for becoming sponsors, are Offstream and Arbonix. Arbonix is a project developer. They're the ones that are actually pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it. And they are doing it through trees. You know, trees have had a difficult time within carbon removal. You should go listen to the show that I did with Lizette Louis from Arbonix. We did a show probably about 6 weeks or 8 weeks ago. And we talk about how the trajectory of trees, afforestation, reforestation within carbon removal has played out, how that impacts whether we are storing biological material in anoxic environments for carbon removal purposes alone. Arbonix is doing something a little bit differently. Europe has over 14 million hectares of underused land, which is abandoned farmland. It's low quality pasture. Not a lot is happening there. A lot of it once was forest. It was cleared a long time ago for farming. But the global food supply and better yields elsewhere has meant that a lot of this land is just underutilized, and we haven't quite figured out what to do with it yet. So Arbonix uses technology to help landowners find this land and then restore it back into carbon-removing biodiverse forests. And that last point is really important because a lot of forestry that takes place is a monoculture, which is maybe solving one problem, but it's not solving the overall polycrisis, ecological crisis. So Arbonix pursues that way of going to market in order to offer corporates high-quality, data-backed European carbon removal credits, helping companies reach their sustainability goals with maximum trust. So go listen to that conversation with Lizette. I'll put the link in the show notes if you want some more. And if you're thinking about this in terms of a cycle here, Offstream would be a service provider to Arbonix. Offstream is there to make carbon compliance simple for project developers. If you're listening, if you work at a carbon removal company or a company producing other types of carbon assets, the data portion of this is super challenging. If you're listening and you haven't had to read through a methodology or any registry documentation, you'll probably live longer than the rest of us who have. It's non-trivial. It's difficult. And that's not to say that it shouldn't be difficult. Much of this should be, so we make sure that quality is actually taking place when carbon is removed or avoided or anything like that. And Offstream exists to make it easier for project developers to not get stuck on the level of data. Varsha Ramesh Walsh, Offstream CEO, she likens their platform to being a GPS for your carbon credit and your MRV plans. It's guiding you through the jungle of certifications and compliance. Oh, I love that. That's such a fun visual way of putting it. This is a world where you can develop and iterate on your project LCAs in minutes, not weeks, where you can focus on doing the important work of growing your business, scaling carbon removal, generating more credits without having to necessarily hire more employees. This is really an important time in carbon removal where minimizing headcount may be necessary for a number of companies to stay alive and keep going. And Offstream is here to help you do that. They're here to help you with your LCA needs. If you're listening, you're a project developer, you know one, and they are having persistent migraines from paperwork, like go over to useoffstream.com. Tell them that Offstream can help them handle the quote unquote boring bits while they can focus on saving the planet. Offstream, because paperwork shouldn't be a full-time job. Crack me up. Thank you, Offstream and Arbonix, for sponsoring Reversing Climate Change. I'm really appreciative that you're able to help me do this. It means a lot. If you're listening to this and you'd like to sponsor Reversing Climate Change, feel free to send me an email. I'll put the email in the show notes too. And let's talk. And okay, now I'm going into the show proper, the intro. Here it is. And thank you again for listening. Hello and welcome to the Reversing Climate Change podcast. I'm Ross Kenyon. I am a carbon removal entrepreneur. I've been that way for the better part of a decade. And I am the host of Reversing Climate Change. I'm really happy to invite an alumna back onto the show, Erin Burns. Erin is the executive director of Carbon 180. We talk a lot about her background in the show. It's actually a big part of the podcast. So you'll hear about how she worked in the Senate for Joe Manchin. She comes from a background and a family in West Virginia that has deep ties to labor and to coal production. It makes sense that she was staffed for the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and the Public Land Subcommittee. All of these things make perfect sense. Erin recently appeared on the CDR Policy Scoop, and it really caught my attention because she said something that was counterintuitive, or maybe at least a little less represented within carbon removal right now, which is that the carbon removal industry shouldn't throw away everything that we care about in order to appeal to the existing political climate with the change in administration. And that may in fact be an error. We can still believe in a future where we have a grip on climate change without having to do all of the same work, pretending we no longer care about that. One, it probably wouldn't work. As Erin knows, we're on record caring about climate. This show is called Reversing Climate Change. And I think it would look rather weak to give up all of one's values in order to appeal to the current regime. I don't know that that's going to work in any case. And it may, in fact, just be disingenuous to try. I think that's a good point. But tactically, how one speaks about this, the kinds of projects one tries to initiate and see through could change during this time. And that is a tactical decision. That is not a decision that requires one to change one's deeply held values for why one is working in carbon removal. And I think that perspective that I attribute to being in DC for about a decade at this point and worked in the halls of power. Those are lessons that you learn from experience. And I like to think that I'm getting to the point in my career where I have some wisdom. I hope so. I think I do. There are things upon which I suspect I may be wise, although saying that out loud decreases your chances of actually being wise, I think. But it is interesting to note just how important experience is here in knowing what is a big deal, what isn't, what's temporary, what's not, and how to think about the trajectory that is longer than a few years. It's the trajectory that might last decades. And that's something that comes from working for 2 digits of time rather than 1 in a particular field. I thank Erin for teaching me so much. She does a great job just explaining how the appropriations process works. So if you slept through civics, this is a great chance to learn how government actually works, where there are possibilities for activism, and how political decisions get made. And before we start the show, one quick plug is if you could please become a paid subscriber to Reversing Climate Change. It would be a great help to me. It helps me grow the show. I'm working on a couple new things right now, trying to get some more sponsorships, trying to just help the show grow and be self-sustaining. And it's only $5 a month. So if you love what I'm doing here, you want to be a part of it, please, on Spotify or whatever platform you use, you can often become a paid subscriber as well. It's $5 a month. I'll put the link at the top of the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. And here's my discussion with Erin Burns. Hello, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Ross. It was great we caught up a little bit before this, and yeah, got to talk about our shared love of Pittsburgh.
That's right. Yeah. I don't know if the audience would have needed 10 minutes on Pittsburgh, ephemera, memorabilia, talking about Permane Brothers and fries on everything.
But this is at least going to give me an excuse to retweet, or like at least in the response to this episode, tweet the Pittsburgh's #1 YouTube video. So that alone is a victory.
I love that. I always love weird regional cities that are maybe Pittsburgh is not past its prime, and obviously like the education and medical systems there are world class and get celebrated quite highly. But these places that maybe everyone focuses on, the bigger cities that we all know about, I always love going to the cities that don't quite make that list because they always have such strong pride about cities like that.
No, I totally agree, and I think it's like it's a sense of history and like pride in that regional history, and one that's like not always celebrated. So I think I'm just like that intense, from Southern West Virginia. So I love regional pride, clearly. I can't even say West Virginia. It's like, no, it's like this particular part of West Virginia. So I think it's great. And Pittsburgh is, it is 2 thumbs up for Pittsburgh.
I agree. And I've had so many forks in my life travel opportunities where it'd be like, well, you could go to Chicago, but you could also go to Cincinnati at this time because you have a week to kill, and be like, you know what? I'll have lots of reasons to go to Chicago. Cincinnati is going to have fewer reasons. I'm going to Cincinnati, and I'll have fun over the Rhine, and I'll party there. And I've had good times in Cincinnati as a result. Like, choose the weirder option. If you're young and you're listening and you have travel opportunities, choose the weird thing. You'll go back to London. You'll go back to Berlin. It'll be there waiting for you. Go somewhere weirder.
I agree. I'm not personally the biggest Skyline Chili fan, but there's some great stuff in Cincinnati. And we used to do, when I was in college in Pittsburgh, we used to just get in the car and drive, and you see those road signs that are the sort of like brown, like some historical thing happened here. And we would just have no plans. We would just have like a sleeping bag in the trunk, and you just like drive and find all those weird little bits, it's like, there's a lot of amazing stuff, and it's free also. Turns out, you don't even pay for your campground. You just, so when you are a cash-strapped college student, you just pack of hot dogs from the gas station and a sleeping bag in your trunk.
Erin, I didn't know we were also connected by our former dirtbag status. That's you're just in dirtbag.
Listen, oh my God. And when I first moved to DC, I moved here without a job. So Ross and I were talking about how I'm the least educated person at Carbon 180. And part of this is like, people have these like life plans, and I moved here without a job, but I, in true like hipster dirtbag fashion, I was a hostess at this restaurant called Meridian Pint in Columbia Heights here in Washington, DC, which is just like the outfit, everything. It was just like peak, 2011, 2012, like hipster dirtbag thing going on. And a place called the Red Derby, if there happen to be any DC sort of like dirtbag hipsters from way back when listening, will appreciate that call out. But so it's like, definitely share that.
Wow. I was at bars at the same time in DC, but I was at Madam's Oregon and Codmother, but not actually that far from you, actually. So there's like an alternate reality where we were at the same bar. It might even
No, I feel like those are for people who are like young but employed. versus mine were like all of my food. I worked at the Columbia Heights Farmers Market on the weekends, and that's like literally all my food was either the like 10 for $10 frozen bags of vegetables at Giant, or the Giant cart, you get like $10 a piece for frozen vegetables, or things that I bartered for at the Columbia Heights Farmers Market, because the farm I worked for, they didn't want to like carry all the stuff back. So I'd be able to like go barter for like eggs and be like, do you want 2 pints of strawberries for some duck eggs? It was great.
How did you have such a amazing career rise from, you're telling me about your growing up in West Virginia all the way to prominent in carbon removal? How?
Oh my God. Right. A lot of dumb luck. It kind of seems like now that I'm telling the story. Honestly, I moved to DC without a plan and did maybe the most West Virginia thing possible, which is go ask Joe Manchin for a job. That was just like, that's how you get a job. You just like Joe Manchin, he'll give you a job. He did. Actually, I got an unpaid internship while I was also working these other jobs. And then a position opened up as a staff assistant. And then the first opening on the legislative team a few months later was on the energy team. And I ended up doing that. And honestly, it was just, I think some of it is that luck of timing of, I was working on things like point source carbon capture, and I was really interested in it. So in West Virginia offices and Dem offices at the time, back when those were a thing, Democratic West Virginia representatives, the same staffer did energy and labor, because so much of the labor work is focused on like heavy industry, like United Mine Workers, steel workers. So you're doing like the energy and labor policy. And it was definitely how I kind of like grew up thinking about this. Like, my papaw's script that he was paid, in his company town, instead of, if you're not familiar with this, script was, so coal mines owned and operating.
Yes, but I don't know what did you say? Like peepaw? Like what relationship is this? Is it
peepaw?
What did you say?
Papa. Oh, is this like a really hillbilly?
Is it grandfather or is it your dad or who is this person? How old are you, Erin?
I'm just from West Virginia, and shockingly, I'm only in my 30s. I just sound like Papa might be a grandpa, or I'm sorry, might be a dad. Papa is always like a grandfather, a great grandfather. That's wild. Anyways, but you pay in script, right? So like instead of US money, my daughter, my 4-year-old, has learned about coal mining and is, and I quote, going to continue her papaw's work in the mines. I think she still hasn't gathered what hard work it is, or the sort of economic opportunities there. Like, I don't know how many coal mining jobs are going to be in West Virginia. But anyways, for me, it always been tied together. Like that had always been my conception of like the energy space was like this piece around what it meant to be a worker in it. Like it wasn't this academic perspective. It wasn't this sort of like understanding of the climate energy space. It was like, oh, I grew up around like coal production. I grew up around coal miners. I grew up around like the sort of economic, those sort of conditions for working in it. And it was interesting to then work on point source carbon capture in the Senate. And this was, sort of like 2011 to 2015 was when I was in the Senate. And it was a weird moment for something like coal, because we had the shale revolution. And so coal had been on this sort of slow decline. Some of it, people starting to raise, climate getting a little traction at the federal level. Mostly as a talking point, not a lot of policy, though this was sort of the Clean Power Plan era under the Obama administration. And but then we had the shale revolution, and cheap natural gas all of a sudden means, coal's like, especially Eastern coal in West Virginia, like these huge impacts. And a lot of the work I did was actually around shoring up pension obligations for mine workers, these unionized mine workers who were potentially losing. There was consolidation amongst the coal companies and this whole issue of them spinning off their liabilities. And all that to say that I think what was exciting to me about carbon capture, because that's kind of a crazy phrase to say sometimes, like, what was exciting about carbon capture is that it, to me, was always in this broader context of the labor force and the economy of these places. And even talking about places like Pittsburgh, which is like that sense of history with things like this. And like, what does it mean to have a future, not necessarily for coal, but for coal communities? And so I was excited because there was only a handful of people working on carbon capture, like writ large, really, like, it wasn't like a super popular thing to work on, but it felt exciting to come in and say, I see the value in something like this. I can see how it can go wrong. And what if we think about it in a very different way? And I think that was I hit the timing right on some of the carbon management stuff where it was a handful of people. I learned what carbon removal was because Noah Deitch came into the Senate office in 2015 when he had just started what is now Carbon 180 and was like, this is director of capture. And he was not the very legitimate Noah of today in terms of all this public credibility. He was this guy from Oakland coming in as Allbirds being like director capture. And I'm like, well, what? Maybe okay, maybe. And luckily, I listened to his very smart ideas and we worked on some early legislation together. So I think, again, a lot of it was that combination of having hit, in my career, I've seen not just carbon management, but climate go from something that was it felt like so niche and, nobody sort of the top of nobody's list to, we saw in the Biden administration, all of a sudden it's it's a huge priority for the White House. And that had never happened really before. Even under the Obama administration, there were efforts on it, but it wasn't the number one priority. Right. And there wasn't the sort of political will and capital in places like Congress to really move stuff on climate at that time. And, so anyways, I feel like in some ways it's that sort of dirtbag West Virginia, all of these different pieces informed it, and that sort of not coming at it from a super traditional, I did my master's in energy modeling or whatever, clearly I'm just reinforcing that stereotype or that idea of me as the least educated person, since I can't even think of the right sort of master's program here. But, I think it is that value of coming at this from a very real world perspective and that prioritization of what are these real world impacts? How are these impacting people? And I think it's also shaped for me how we thought about this at Carbon 180, where I think, the work we do on things like equity and justice, I understand intellectually why a lot of that can become across as very partisan. And for me, thinking about this and it's just the practical, you're just sort of ignoring the very real world implications of the work that we do or the potential real world benefits and all of these really amazing opportunities. If you're not talking about things like equity and justice, it's not about a sort of partisan ideology.
It's a different kind of Democrat too. I'm thinking of organized labor. It's October Sky, basically. You're coming from coal mines in West Virginia. You have some Homer Hickam running through your intellectual heritage, I think. Are you
nicest thing anyone's ever said to me?
Oh, yeah. I love that movie and book as a kid. I think I read that thing 100 times. That's different from what is typically represented inside of carbon removal. It's not a surprise that that's been part of Carbon 180's DNA, since I associate Carbon 180's work on equity and justice as very much leading that conversation, which is one of the reasons why your comments within the CDR Policy Scoop show were so interesting to me, because many people right now are freaking out, saying that we need to downplay some of the more progressive elements within carbon removal. And you had a very nice counterpoint that actually maybe that is the wrong turn. I don't want to mischaracterize what you said. Maybe you can restate it.
No, it was a counterpoint. I disagreed for sure. Sebastian, I disagree on this. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Love to disagree.
Are you allowed to do that? Sebastian, is she allowed to do that? Okay, anyways.
Yes, I think it's so important. Look, carbon removal, we've come a long way in the past 4 years. And I think in a lot of ways, the sector's matured under a very pro-climate progressive administration that was sort of making sure that people had, they had to at least talk about equity and justice in their work. We started that work before this administration. We started that work when we very first started thinking about policy. And it's because if you think about what it takes to build these long-term, these durable political coalitions, which we will absolutely need in carbon removal. We need lots of public policy in carbon removal. It's going to cost a lot of money to scale carbon removal in the United States. It's going to bring a lot of opportunity, but you need people, Democrats, Republicans, to vote for these policies for decades, right? And I think that sense of longevity is important for us to hold on to, even if it's something that we haven't had as a field firsthand. And what I see sometimes is this sense of fear that the progress that we've made is going to be really quickly taken away. And so what can we do to stop that? What can we immediately do to sort of make a case to a very different set of political actors that what we do is valuable, and realizing that we've built an entire, so much of the advocacy has been focused on convincing a very different set of people with a very different set of priorities. And we haven't been prepared to, I do think that's a lesson to say political wins the political wins will change over decades. And what does it mean to create that durability in the case for carbon removal, the coalitions for carbon removal? And so that's not to say we shouldn't be talking about the economic benefits of carbon removal. It is to say that then we're sort of the panic you feel now, you're going to feel again if you just start to go and say this isn't about climate and we're not setting up an ecosystem for climate. We need to have this sense of longevity to say, we're doing this over decades. You're not fooling anybody. Carbon removal is for climate. That is why you do carbon removal. Nobody's going to think that you're not doing it for climate, and you're not going to trick anybody by saying this isn't about climate. It's called carbon removal. Like, it's sort of in the name, y'all. You can talk about things like direct air capture to enhance oil recovery, and we know that's not the long game. We know that's got a short shelf life if it's viable at all. Or if we should be doing it at all. And, sure, there are reasons to preserve biodiversity reasons, things like that, on the sort of soils and things like, but that's not why that's not the primary cause. It's, again, we called it the carbon removal field for a reason. So I think it's sort of, all it's going to do is make you seem disingenuous. And instead, you need to understand what it means to build champions in the long run, so that it's not this question of, there are some people who you're never going to convince. But if we're looking at things like, what do we need to do to protect things like the direct air capture hubs program, then we need to look at, these have been bipartisan champions, right? And we haven't won bipartisan champions by acting like we don't care about climate. It's saying that we care about climate. And we also see these opportunities in places like Texas and Louisiana and Wyoming and California, where climate may or may not be your primary motivation, but you're also going to see those job benefits, integration with existing infrastructure. You're going to see potential uses around, not just saline storage of CO2 in the near term, but opportunities around other use cases for the captured CO2, right? That let's learn more about potential air quality benefits, right? If we're going to put these in places that have hosted these industrial projects, are there additional air quality benefits? So I think, to me, it's that sense of, you're not going to fool anybody by not talking about climate. Also, like, we're all on the record talking. I don't know, just not that, like, we're not going to pull the wool over everybody's eyes. And I just don't think that is about what's important. I think a lot of times, again, when we talk about something like carbon removal, we can talk in these very broad, progressives like care about climate change, conservatives don't. I don't know that lack of nuance is particularly useful for a place like carbon removal. It is much deeper than that, right? Like, it is, when we get into why people across the political spectrum supported something like carbon removal, it is much more nuanced, right? And a lot of that this gets back to this question of things like equity and justice being partisan or nonpartisan. Look, I think it's a moral imperative that we care about this. Like, why else are we, we're scaling carbon removal to address climate change, and we care about climate change because it harms people. Like, this is about a people-centered approach. And if you want members of Congress to vote for public policy to support your thing, you better be able to show how the communities and places that are going to host these projects love these projects and benefit from these projects and have a say in those projects. You're just not going to get those really durable political coalitions without that. So the idea that now we're moving away from not just climate, but talking about the nuts and bolts of, equity and justice in projects, that to me scares me, because it will undermine not just long-term support from places like Democrats, but it's going to undermine any ability to build a durable political coalition.
Those that I know that have potentially the most appealing solutions for right-of-center audiences are those working on dual-use technologies that maybe can sell to the Department of Defense or are part of the critical minerals work that's happening right now. Man, I saw so much celebrating over the trade war from friends of mine who work on critical minerals. I'm like, that might be good for you individually. I'm not sure if it's great for the world overall or even for the country.
Boy.
How should we feel about those that are in a better position to appeal to right of center sensibilities? Is that necessarily a bad thing? Does that somehow enhance carbon removal and climate action's applicability across the political spectrum?
So I think look, there's a reason we've always tried to build a broad coalition, right? And I think it's totally fine. I'm not naive that, Carbon 180 is going to be really convincing to certain, folks on the political spectrum. We're not always going to be the best messenger for certain things. And what I think is important, it's the question of getting into things like tactics versus long-term priorities. And yeah, your tactics should shift and ours are shifting, right? And there are ways in which, we've always worked with people across the political spectrum. Sometimes we're not going to be the thing that we may be the org that convinces one group of people and doesn't convince others. That's always the case. That's going to be the case for, every other organization. What I think it's important to do is to be able to adapt tactics in ways where you've built relationships and trust with people and who care about very different things. So you're able on that tactical space to still operate within that. I think people maybe maybe there's more knowledge about this now, but I think about when I first came to the Senate and the idea that at that point, things are maybe a little different now. I feel like 99% of staffers, it didn't matter. Your bosses might be out there arguing about certain things, or you're talking, you're working together, you're talking, you're trying to get your job done. And I think that's important. What I worry about is not the tactics changing. I think it's essential tactics change. I worry about those long-term priorities changing. And that's what I see sometimes. I think that's true of are we going to send people who might be more convincing to talk about this? Cool. Are those people more convincing because they're saying they're changing their actual plans to not, be climate focused, to not engage with communities, things like that? That's what I think is the important distinction.
Shopping is hard, right? But there's a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And she sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what I love and send back the rest. It's so easy. Personal styling for everyone. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
I'm Dr. Jen Ashton, your host for Season 2 of The Visibility Gap, a podcast presented by Cigna Healthcare. Throughout this season, we'll be tackling something vital, the women's health gap. We'll hear from real people and experts as we unpack important topics like maternal health, menopause, and heart disease. Listen in and download the new season wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Enterprise Mobility. From fleet management to flexible truck rentals to technology solutions, Enterprise Mobility helps businesses find the right mobility solutions so they can find new opportunities. Because if your business is on the road, they want to make sure it's on the road to success. Enterprise Mobility, moving you moves the world. Find your road at enterprisemobility.com.
Okay. I feel better now. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah. But I'm not naive. I'm not listen, I first started this job in 2018. Under the last Trump administration, we were able to get $60 million for carbon removal R&D. We worked, and that required Democrats and Republicans, as it will always require, in perpetuity, it has in the past. It's not that and that's also when we started our equity and justice work. And that's when, I won't mention, there was a Republican senator, a staffer for a Republican senator who I was talking to in the elevator. I said something to make a comment about sort of environmental justice. He was like, I bet my boss knows more about environmental justice than many of the other people that you're talking to, because it is, where I think back to, I testified in front of the Senate Energy Committee like a little over a year ago, I think. And, you go in and you like prep beforehand. You're like, the big thing you prep for is, in my experience, is what are the senators going to ask you? Because they're going to come with their own priorities. So you like have your testimony. They are not necessarily going to ask you what you want to talk about in your testimony. They might ask a real off the wall question and you don't, want to look like you don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, so Senator Hawley is not somebody that I've really worked with. I used to staff the Energy Committee. So I was like, I know some of these guys, like I know what they're going to ask, whatever. And I was like, what's he going to ask me? And he actually just asked he didn't ask me any questions. He asked the EPA witness questions, and they were extremely environmental justice focused. Like they were like, hey, the health impacts of this thing, why isn't EPA coming in and helping the people in my state about this, like these like legacy projects that are harming people's health, and like talking about like the cancer impacts and things like that. So anyways, it's just to say that what I see sometimes is in the carbon removal field right now is us operating in this world of like black and white political divides and these high level sort of like political conversations, but really that when it comes down to it, the victories and the losses we're going to have are going to live in a much more nuanced place. And those tactics are going to matter, but it's also going to matter that we're sticking to those like core priorities, because we aren't building a carbon removal sector just to build a carbon removal sector. We're building a carbon removal sector to like live in a 1.5 degree world, right? And if we lose sight of that, then like what are we doing here?
I appreciate the wisdom of that take. That's a flattering way to say it, but surely it's the result of working in this space for a long time and noticing these are the trends over time, and not to think that the sky is falling and that we won't be able to do anything. I think that's an important, well, also maintaining that your values are important to you, and there are probably many things that are deeply concerning. We also need to move on and keep trying to make progress.
Yeah, and I think it's the difference between we need to raise the alarm and protecting things like the direct air capture hubs program. That is like all hands on deck. Let's do it. And that's, we also are going to need policy for a very long time. So we need to be focused on doing both things. We need to, and I think, back to 2015, 2016, working on things like the 45Q tax credit, we did not have the capacity as a carbon removal field to work on more than one thing at a time. We could work on one thing. And that one thing had other people working on it that we could kind of be like, cool, we're going to hop on to this carbon capture coalition effort. We have that capacity now, guys. We can do more than one thing at once. So like, let's keep all of those things in mind.
I want to chase down this theme about wisdom back a decade earlier. How might you, baby Noah, don't put words in Noah's mouth unless you really want to. What would you have learned, baby Erin, a decade ago coming into DC policy world? Would you have felt the same way, or is that the result of experience?
Well, that's a great question. I think it is the result of experience, because I think it is, look, there's a reason people hire folks who've worked in Congress a bunch, for example, because it's sort of to the outside, sometimes it's like a black box of like, how do these decisions get made? And I think it's helpful to share examples of like, if I think back to my Senate days, if there was, actually, I'll give you a very concrete example. He's not in office anymore. So I feel like for a while I was like very wary to talk about my time in Senator Manchin's office, because it was like everybody's like, what's on this man's mind?
A big deal, I suspect, after you were no longer there.
Yes. When I wasn't there. No, when I wasn't there. Everyone was very focused. I got a lot of reporter calls on background being like, well, how is he thinking about this? And so I was very cautious. I have no interest in being the person to decipher that. But, I'll give an example of there were times where I think there was a sense of he's going to do what the coal companies ask him to. And what I saw on the inside was, yeah, sometimes that's true. And sometimes it's not true. We did things on mine safety, on black lung, that were Dem-only bills, that we were working with folks like, Bernie Sanders and people that aren't, on the Hill anymore now, because, I have the wisdom flattering in one angle. The other is just, I've been around for a while doing this. We worked on minor pension things and mine safety and things like that, I don't think we ever got a Republican to support some of those mine safety black lung things. And we were working with those offices, Harkin, like that were seen as like progressive stalwarts. And when, the coal companies and the mining folks would come in, they would talk to me about some of the climate stuff that they wanted us to do. And they would be like, we know you're doing this thing on mine safety. We know not even to bring it up. Like, we know that, like, there is no point even trying to convince anybody to not do this. Like, it was so much a part of what was, he was, Senator Manchin was governor during the Upper Big Branch mine disaster. He lost an uncle in a mine disaster when he was younger. We still call those families regularly, the Upper Big Branch families. And it was just a very, and I share this, it's the lesson to take about it is not, and this is why I didn't talk about it before, it's not Joe Manchin specific. It's to say that understanding how these decisions are made, where, yes, I'm not trying to be naive about the role that money and things like that play in politics, and the sway that those state interests in those communities can have, where I think about, if you ask your member, if you're staffing a senator and you want them to, I don't know, sponsor a bill, that part of what you're going to do, you're going to have that summary of that bill, and you're going to be like, these people like it, these people don't. And a lot of times you're going to need to know what 5 people in that state think, where it's like, it's going to be like Randy Dye, the state forester of West Virginia at the time, if he was like, I really care about this forestry issue, I was like, that in and of itself might be enough for me to just like get the senator to like be like, cool, done, like, let's double check. So it's just to say that I think that wisdom of when you live, especially for something like carbon removal, where it doesn't necessarily get politicized at a national level, people are still learning what carbon removal is. Climate is politicized, but carbon removal not in the same way. That a lot of those decisions about something like carbon removal, they can get caught up in that bigger fight. But a lot of it is going to live in those sort of like much more tactical realities. And so I think it's definitely, for me at least, a learned lesson from that sort of experience.
Wow. Let's catch people up on what's happening now in Congress and in national politics, and maybe how you are looking forward to applying some of those lessons moving forward.
Oh boy. Do we have to catch people up, or people not
how much information
stress
is
reading at least?
Yeah, going on.
Yeah. So I think this is what we have to understand. So I think these are the important things. If you work in carbon removal and you care about U.S. federal policy, here's what I think you should care about. The first is we had a bunch of wins in particular for direct air capture, not only direct air capture, but definitely focus on direct air capture. And the 2 highest impact of those are 45Q, the updates to 45Q. You got $180 per ton for direct air capture to saline. That's a big deal. And the other piece is going to be the direct air capture hubs program. So lots of different hubs. And, those are billions of dollars across both of them. So that's what we're keeping an eye on. We've got, and especially because, look, there are always, across any administration change, there's going to be a review of work and priorities and things like that. And I think it is important to show the value of those direct air capture hubs, to depoliticize them, right? To not make you're not making the big picture case necessarily for the value of direct air capture in the long run, but to say these hubs are going to lead to these, I think numbers are great. Come in, talking to companies, talking to their members of Congress who represent them and talking about the real world impacts of this, the economic benefits, those sorts of things. I think that's great. And I think keeping an eye, it's understanding some of those inner workings of, we'll see a budget from the president. We'll see that appropriations process move through. And some of those, I think that's the other thing to keep track of, is that sort of budget appropriation cycle, where we'll see the biggest levers for things like direct air capture hubs, the R&D programs, the purchasing prize, all of that's happening at the agencies. And I think those are just the things that get the most attention. There have been lots of other wins around research and development for ocean carbon removal, and some of the climate smart ag work and things like that. So it's those bigger programs that I think at this moment, that's what you got to pay attention to. And I would just encourage folks where, if you work at a company, at a carbon removal company, if you, are, I don't know, in a particular state and you've got members of Congress who don't know the specifics of the success of this or why it's important to your state, like you should be telling them right now.
How does appropriations work? I suspect people have heard this word. There's like another long word that people are like, sounds boring. Is it boring?
No, I mean, I'm the wrong person to ask. I love appropriations. Okay, let me give you the digestible version of appropriations. So let me say, if people don't know, there's something called the Congressional Research Service, or CRS. It's operated under the Library of Congress, and it's fantastic. And it's researchers, nonpartisan researchers. They do work specifically. Congress can request reports, like staff can request reports, but they're mostly public, and they will explain in really digestible ways these issues. So like if you want to go for like a nonpartisan but like highly informed take on this, go to Library of Congress, loc.gov, and you're going to be able to search CRS reports. And they have great appropriations ones, for example, that are like, here's the 2-pager on like, what is an appropriations process? It's a fantastic resource. Like CRS, they're angels, like love those guys. So anyways, they're a really great resource and it's publicly available. So I would just say like, that's a good read. And they do have much deeper dives.
People listening. So like, go check the show notes if you want to look this up. It's there. Go read it.
Yeah. And one day if they are going to take like, if you can do some sort of like influencer for CRS, I would be happy. I don't really use social media, but I will start. Listen, I will download TikTok if to support CRS. So anyway, so appropriations refers to, and I'm going to talk about this in sort of like typically how it's supposed to operate, is every year Congress funds the government. They decide. Now, there are programs outside of this, defense programs, mandatory spending, Social Security, stuff like that, where they have slightly different. This is largely about what we call discretionary spending or fit spending, where year-to-year decisions are made. And the process typically works where you'll get a president's budget, and that typically comes out in February. It is quite typical for it to be delayed, especially the first year, because it takes time to put these together. The president's budget is a document largely where a new administration will lay out their priorities. And the other function it really serves beyond sort of like high level priorities is the agencies spend a long time putting together these budgets. And if we're talking about some place like the Department of Energy, within that are going to be research priorities and update information that's going to help inform congressional staff on what's going on, right? It's a really great way to communicate with them in the technical details. So you have the president's budget come out. Congress, they're the appropriators. They have the power of the purse. They get to decide how much money is going to be spent. So a lot of times, not in a partisan way, they're like, cool, thanks for your budget. Like, this is our job. Like, that's sweet of you. Thanks. And they start off the appropriations process. And in the internal space, there's a couple of things that happen. One is all members of Congress typically put together their list of appropriations priorities. And those can be influenced a number of ways. They typically have what's called an appropriations form, and you submit a form. Some of them are Google forms, some of them are super detailed. And you can do this as a private citizen in theory if you know that this is what's going on. It is what a lot of lobbyists and others do. And they're going to reach out to some people. They're going to go to their universities. They're going to go to the people, but well-oiled machines are working behind the scenes to tell each member. This is especially true of members on the Appropriations Committee. These are the members who have the most influence, those on the Appropriations Committee. And like any other committee, they got subcommittees. Those subcommittees, if we're talking about the Department of Energy, we're talking about the Energy and Water Subcommittee, for example. This is the subcommittee that makes a lot of the decisions or has the most influence over those particular agencies. And you might look at, if I'm thinking about the Office of Fossil Energy, where carbon management has historically been housed. When I worked in Senator Manchin's office, there were like 2-3 groups who would reach out to us to try and influence not very many people, especially if we're talking about like a decade ago. Not that much influence happening at the Department of Energy in general, certainly not at Office of Fossil Energy. And you might reach out to members like Senator Manchin or Senator Capito, regardless of whether or not they were on the Appropriations Committee, because they have state interest in this. So there's this whole process where it's like members put together their priorities, then appropriations members put together, and then the committees take all these spreadsheets basically of saying, what does everybody care about? And they're going to carry a different amount of weight, right? So senators on the Appropriations Committee, that's going to carry more weight than senators off. But, Senator Manchin, Senator Capito on something like the Office of Fossil Energy, probably going to carry more weight than somebody else because the national lab for Office of Fossil Energy is in their state. And that's something they care about, right? We might submit requests on other things, but we're going to say, no, this carbon capture piece, that's super important for our office. And that's important. These pieces are important to know because that's the nuts and bolts of how things get in or out of an appropriations bill, right? So if you're talking about something like direct air capture, it's not just about saying everybody's cool with direct air capture. You need champions. So you need people who are going to say, this is my top priority. This is why, and I'm going to go to them for it. And if it's left out, I'm going to raise trouble. Because otherwise, if everybody's cool with it, but not a champion, then it's if it's left out, then you got nobody who's going to go to the mat for this. So you go through that process, and they have hearings about this. So you will see there are budget and the budget and appropriations hearings. These are two separate things. But you'll also see, I'm not going to muddy the process talking about authorizers and appropriations, but basically these appropriators, they're the ones, again, funding the government. And they put these appropriations bills through. So in theory, each year you get an appropriations bill, you get an energy and water bill, you get HHS, you get all of these bills, and they go through a typical committee process, subcommittee to full committee, to the House and Senate floor. Cool. We've passed and funded the government. What you've seen more recently, though, is a lot of continuing resolutions or CRs, which is to say, we're not going to go through this process. We're just keeping things the same. Or you hear the phrase, maybe just in DC, cromnibus, which is a CR and an omnibus. And the omnibus is referring really to putting together a bunch of these. You're not going to individually vote on energy and water bill, HHS, whatever it is. You're going to just put a big package and say, this is funding the full government, and these are new bills. These are going to change things. That's the omnibus. The CR part's going to say, well, for these agencies, things that are more politicized, DOE typically not super politicized, but EPA funding, typically a little more politicized. That one you might just get a CR. You're cool, we can't agree, we're going to move on. We got to fund the government. And that's where, again, going back to things like government shutdowns and the stuff that does tend to be a little bit more visible, this is the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And there's a reason folks hire people off the Hill to navigate this sort of thing, because that is the best case. That's the sort of how it should operate on paper, and a little bit of insight. And I could talk for 12 more hours about the ins and outs of it.
Take me out to the ball game. What are you doing? Did you know DirecTV has the most MLB games?
So you're singing?
Yeah, they put your favorite teams front and center right when you turn it on. Buy me some cold cuts and flapjacks.
Those aren't even the words.
I'm allergic to peanuts.
Stream DirecTV, home of the most MLB games. Visit DirecTV.com. Claim based on total games offered on national and regional sports networks. RSNs available with choice package or higher. Availability of RSNs varies by zip code and package.
Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse.
Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved Chief Resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse, April 3rd, only on Netflix.
It's a proper civics lecture. It's dense. I'm going to send that to people in the future. Be like, this is what happens here.
Yeah, in theory.
Grade. Here it is.
Just tweet me all your appropriations questions and I will either answer them or I'll tag in all the amazing. That was one of the benefits of, talking about a sense of history. When I started Manchin's office, this came, he went into office because Senator Byrd passed away. And Robert C. Byrd, what just like this huge figure in West Virginia. But even on the Appropriations Committee, which was huge for West Virginia, he was able to do a lot for that. And I had this benefit of these fantastic people who really cared about these programs in West Virginia, who were either still on the Appropriations Committee, went to other offices, and who would meet with me as like a young staffer to be like, you have to know that this is important. And like, let me teach you all of this history. So I feel like, just a huge shout out to those folks who were just like so generous with their knowledge, and it just made a very big difference as a young staffer coming in. So it's like not just, back to your question of like wisdom and history and all those sorts of things. I think it's also important. It's like not just my own history. It's like what I learned from all these people who were like really, generous in passing on their expertise and their knowledge.
How important is political capital here? I imagine you probably don't get that many shots to save particular projects during appropriations that are important to your office. And so you probably need to make them count. And how can carbon removal compete against, I imagine they have lots of things they want to protect in their district. How do you ensure that is the case for carbon removal?
Sustained effort, I think, is essential. This isn't a one-time thing. You got to be talking to everybody all the time. I know those little levers, because it gets into the weeds, especially on stuff like this of that comment. I said, you need a champion. It also matters, do you have people who are just like, we don't care one way or another? Like, in some ways, having like a handful of champions and a bunch of people who are sort of like, meh, it's not my thing, I won't worry about it one way or another, that can be ideal. If you've got people who are champions, but you got real big enemies, that's not good either. So I think a lot of it is just about that sustained effort. And I think it's going to matter, in each state or district, it's going to be a little bit different. But I think that's where, again, going back to, my very firsthand lessons about how things like equity and justice aren't necessarily partisan. I don't think anybody's going around being like, if I talked about Joe Manchin's voting record, I don't think anybody's like, that guy, like progressive champion of equity and justice. And when I think about the work that I did around protecting minors' pensions or mine health, health and safety for minors, and the really messed up stuff that was happening, there was this Center for Public Integrity report called Burden and Breathless. It's really fantastic. It's a 3-part, I believe, research. It's a massive research project. And I'm forgetting the journalist's name right now. I can't believe it, but was exposing how coal companies would hire this one doctor from Johns Hopkins, and who would basically come in and testify about, this isn't black lung, this isn't black lung, which would mean that minors would not get their black lung benefits. And these are minors who do not have necessarily all this access to all these lawyers and the medical information. Say coal companies were sort of, gaming the system here, and, concerns were raised about this. And we worked on legislation to say, like, what does it look like to further entrench and protect the rights of these minors who have been disenfranchised, who have been like, or disempowered, who have been, face this sort of like economic oppression, this sort of like all of, they've gotten black laws, like, and they're not even able to access their federally guaranteed benefits. And so just to say, but that's because these coal miners are important in West Virginia. The United Mine Workers are important. There are all of these pieces. So I think it's to say that a lot of times the thing that's going to convince people to be champions of something like direct air capture in those closed door conversations is going to be that the people in their states care about that. And again, I risk sounding really naive here. I understand. And I don't mean this to talk about issues at large, but when we're talking about something that is a little more, it's more nuanced, it's more specific about a direct air capture play. It's not the battle for belief in climate change or not. It's not, the battle to protect abortion and it's these behind the scenes negotiations on something like direct air capture. There are going to be those bigger forces that we aren't going to be able to influence, that we aren't going to be able to even necessarily guarantee our own protection from and things like that. And to give ourselves the best chances, I think building that sustained support from constituencies in, states and districts, that can go a very long way when you're talking about the mechanisms of how these deals get hashed out.
Erin, do you want to sing along The Ghost of Tom Joad before we leave?
I was going to sing a Pete Seeger, Which Side Are You On? Coal miner ballad. So
what about the Wobbly song, the One Industrial Union Grand? You know that one?
Or I wish you already knew Pittsburgh's number one. What a I don't know if I can do the falsetto sort of thing that they do in the 80s.
At the Steeler bar I was telling you about. I feel like is it a polka song too?
Oh.
No. Okay. I'm thinking of a different song.
It's got moments of a sort of polka influence on I think about it. No, this one isn't though. There's a lot of good Pittsburgh jams out there, but Pittsburgh number one, I think it has a video and everything. It doesn't get the credit it deserves.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's good. I don't know. Where are we going with this? I was going to say also you could watch Harlan County, USA. That's another thing you could watch.
I was going to say you should, and you can hear a rendition of Which Side Are You On? That's really fantastic. Harlan County, USA. Great. Definitely good watching.
I'm surprised this conversation had so much to do with your origin story here and how much it clearly influences your work, since I very rarely hear this represented in carbon removal discussions. Is that just the industry does not recruit people from backgrounds like this, or is it why is it? Why don't you see it? Or am I just talking to the wrong people? It could be that too.
You're not. I love this question. It gets to the core of one of the things that I think is important at Carbon 180, which is valuing a lot of kinds of expertise, including that lived experience. I'm very proud that we have a lot of people from frontline communities, and it shapes how you think about this. And I remember a reporter saying this maybe, that a lot of times when she talks to white people in climate, that she hears a background, how did you get into this? That was really rooted in I loved nature. I went to a lot of national parks, those sorts, which is great. That's fine. I think the thing that was highlighted though is that that's the story, right? That it's very driven by a particular kind of experience that one set of people is going to have. And I think that gets to this question of what's important in driving really effective climate policy. And a big part of that, I think, is who works in climate policy. And is this something that's accessible to people? We're not just talking about, we're talking about people from these places that are going to host these projects having a say in this. And part of the way that they're going to have a say is they're having a role. It's about inviting them to build these technologies and projects, not just host them, but to be a part of developing what the sector looks like. And I think that that's really important. And I think it's been something that we've really tried to do at Carbon 180 when we think about that mix of, certainly some folks here come to climate through their experiences in nature and engaging in those spaces, and other people come from it, like me, where I'm this coal piece, or I grew up in oil, a mile from an oil refinery, and that was my that's shaped how I think about it. And I think that that's really valuable. You want a lot of different, sometimes opposing, sometimes converging views on what's important when you're building this. This is going to be a sector that exists for decades, hopefully, that, as we say, creates a more livable world for everybody. And I think that's a really, who gets to make decisions about this is not just, selfishly I say, it's not just about determining success, but it also just makes for a much richer, better, more equitable, and just experience. So I'm team, invite all kinds of people to come in and work on carbon removal. And I think the carbon removal space is very welcoming in the sense of we're excited to have more people. It's not a closed door kind of place. So I think thinking about how we can proactively make it accessible to other people, because I think we're already very welcoming. The more the merrier in CDR. So how do we make sure that people with lots of different backgrounds and lots of experiences see themselves in this field so that they'll come work in it and make it even better?
I agree with that wholeheartedly, which is why I was poking at you earlier for your least educated person at Carbon 180, where that only measures one kind of experience. Formal. Good. Make sure that.
I'm just very impressed. My colleagues are really amazing, and I'm just very impressed by them, and I get to learn from them all the time, and not just because of their formal degrees and things like that. And I have my own set of expertise, and both lived and, from books. I don't know, but it's great to have that mix, I think. And if I can validate from my positional power the value in having somebody who doesn't have isn't just coming at this from the perspective of deep technical expertise, but pairing the experience that different people have that can and should include deep technical expertise. I think that's the magic, right? That's the fun bit. That's how you drive really effective climate policy.
If you're listening and you'd like to get involved in carbon removal, we need you. It's not full. Carbon removal is not full. Come on in. We need a lot more elbow grease and brain power. There's opportunities here. I hope there's more and many more in the years to come. And thanks for being here, Erin. It was really great to
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This was so fun.
I think. Yeah, I don't think it went the way that we intended it to, in a good way, though.
The value of being less prepared than you should for a podcast.
Is that a comment about me or about you?
Oh, about me. 100% about me. You saw me. Listeners can't see that I came in here all disheveled and, running between meetings. So, no, I loved it. This was great. I think I always appreciate the opportunity to have a very genuine conversation. That's, I think it's wonderful. It's a great way to spend time.